Hello guys, it's Saul. Have you ever seen a product and immediately thought, who on earth came up with this? Seriously. Today, we live in an era where companies compete with one another for the slightest advantage in the speed or efficiency of their products. Smartphones replaced cameras, MP3 players, GPS devices, alarm clocks, and a dozen other gadgets we used to carry around. Streaming completely changed the way we watch movies and listen to music. Some inventions really do make life easier. But then, there are the other ones. Products that solve problems nobody actually has. Products that make you wonder how they ever got approved in the first place. And some are so unbelievably ridiculous that it's hard to believe they were real. The crazy part? These weren't April Fool's pranks. Real companies designed them. Real factories manufactured them. Real stores put them on their shelves. And yes, real people actually bought them. Imagine spending money on a tool that helps you dice a banana, but 2 times slower than you could that by yourself. Or buying a toaster whose only purpose is burning your own face onto a piece of bread. Or owning a little plastic robot that doesn't walk, doesn't talk, doesn't help you with anything. It just dances whenever your MP3 player is turned on. It almost sounds fake. But every product you'll see today was sold to actual customers. Some disappeared almost overnight because nobody wanted them. Others somehow became collectible years later. And a few are still remembered today simply because people can't believe anyone thought they were a good idea. So today, we're counting down 20 of the weirdest, most unnecessary, and completely pointless products ever made. Some are surprisingly expensive, some are absolutely hilarious, and a few will leave you wondering, who actually spent money on this? Let's get started. 20. 24-karat gold toilet paper. Let's begin with something that perfectly answers the question, what do you buy when you already own absolutely everything? Apparently, gold toilet paper. Yes, this was a real luxury product. Instead of ordinary paper, each roll was decorated with genuine 24-karat gold flakes, turning one of the most ordinary household items into one of the most expensive. The company behind it claimed that using the paper was the ultimate symbol of luxury. Every sheet sparkled. Every roll was packaged inside an elegant display box. And the price? Around $1 million for a single roll. To put that into perspective, you could buy a mansion, several luxury sports cars, or comfortably retire in many parts of the world for the same amount of money. Instead, someone thought spending it on toilet paper made perfect sense. The manufacturer even claimed that tiny gold flakes would remain on your skin after use, giving you what they described as a luxurious experience. Whether anyone actually wanted that is another question entirely. The product attracted enormous attention online, not because people wanted to buy it, but because nobody could believe it existed. For most people, toilet paper is something you buy without thinking twice. You hope it's soft, you hope it lasts a while, and that's about it. Turning it into a luxury status symbol felt like solving a problem nobody had. To this day, it's remembered less as a useful invention and more as one of the strangest luxury products ever created. Fortunately, the next product was much more affordable. Unfortunately, it wasn't much more useful. 19. iDog. If you owned an iPod during the mid-2000s, there's a good chance you've at least seen one of these. The iDog looked like something straight out of a futuristic toy store. It had glowing LED eyes, floppy ears, and a smooth plastic body shaped like a cartoon dog. At first glance, you might think it was some kind of robotic pet. It wasn't. In reality, the iDog had one very specific job. It listened to your music. Well, sort of. You plugged your MP3 player into the toy using a headphone cable, and the iDog reacted by moving its head, flashing colorful lights, and making little electronic sounds that supposedly matched the beat of whatever song was playing. That was basically the entire product. It didn't fetch, it didn't walk, it couldn't answer questions. It certainly wasn't intelligent. It simply danced, if you can even call it dancing. To be fair, when it launched in 2005, people thought it looked incredibly futuristic. Robot pets were becoming popular, and companies were searching for creative accessories to sell alongside Apple's massively successful iPod. The iDog seemed like the perfect companion, until people actually brought one home. After the novelty wore off, most owners realized they had purchased an expensive plastic decoration that occasionally blinked and nodded its head. It didn't improve your music.
It didn't sound better. It didn't make playlists. It just sat on your desk, moving whenever music played nearby. Many children loved it for the first few days. Then it quietly found a permanent place on a bedroom shelf, where it collected dust for the next several years. Ironically, that's exactly why they're remembered today. Not because they were useful, but because they perfectly capture the strange gadget craze of the 2000s. Companies were willing to put electronics into absolutely everything, whether people needed them or not. And speaking of products that relied almost entirely on novelty, the next item proved that even something as simple as a finger-sized skateboard could become a worldwide obsession. 18. Finger skateboards. At first glance, they looked exactly like miniature skateboards. Tiny wheels, tiny trucks, tiny grip tape. Everything looked authentic. The only difference? They weren't designed for your feet. They were designed for your fingers. Known as Tech Deck fingerboards, these little toys exploded in popularity during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Kids spent hours learning tricks using only 2 fingers. There were tiny kickflips, tiny ollies, tiny grinds. Some people even built entire skate parks on their bedroom floors, complete with ramps, rails, staircases, and half-pipes. To be fair, they were actually pretty entertaining. The strange part came afterward. As their popularity exploded, companies began selling hundreds of accessories that nobody really needed. Mini backpacks, tiny helmets, display stands, replacement wheels, miniature toolkits, even microscopic shoes for your fingers. Yes, finger shoes. Some of these accessories cost almost as much as the fingerboard itself. The hobby slowly transformed from a simple toy into an endless collection of add-ons that promised to improve your finger skating experience. Did anyone actually need tiny sneakers for 2 fingers? Probably not. But thousands of kids bought them anyway. Looking back, it's amazing how much money people spent customizing toys that were already only a few inches long. The fingerboards themselves remain surprisingly popular among collectors today. The accessories? Not so much. They've become a perfect example of companies finding creative ways to sell extra products that added very little value. And the next invention followed that exact same formula. Take an ordinary toy, add a few unnecessary accessories, and convince people they couldn't live without them. 17. Furby Boom accessories. If the original Furby wasn't strange enough, companies somehow found a way to make it even stranger. By the time Furby Boom arrived, it wasn't just a toy anymore. It had become an entire ecosystem of products designed to convince kids they needed far more than the Furby itself. There were carrying cases, special sleeping bags, outfits, feeding accessories, collectible cards, stickers, and countless other add-ons that promised to make your electronic pet happier. The funny part was that your Furby didn't actually need any of them. The toy worked exactly the same whether you bought the accessories or not. But clever marketing made children believe they were missing out. Commercials showed happy kids surrounding their Furby with mountains of extra items, making it feel as if owning only the toy wasn't enough. Parents quickly discovered that buying the Furby was only the beginning. Every birthday or holiday seemed to introduce another accessory that somehow became essential. Looking back, it was one of the earliest examples of companies turning a simple toy into an endless stream of purchases.
Kids loved it, manufacturers loved it even more, and parents, not so much. Today, many of those accessories are forgotten, sitting in old boxes in attics, while the Furby itself gets all the nostalgia. 16. Mini USB vacuum. Around the mid-2000s, it felt like every gadget company had the exact same idea. If something could be plugged into a USB port, they were going to make it. USB fans, USB lights, USB coffee warmers, and of course, the tiny USB vacuum cleaner. The concept sounded surprisingly practical. It was advertised as the perfect way to clean crumbs, dust, and tiny bits of dirt from your computer keyboard. In reality, it barely had enough power to pick up a grain of rice. Most models were powered entirely by your computer's USB port, which meant the motor was extremely weak. Commercials showed spotless keyboards after just a few seconds of cleaning, but real users often found themselves pushing crumbs around instead of actually vacuuming them. Even if it worked perfectly, the amount of dirt inside a keyboard rarely justified owning a dedicated miniature vacuum. A simple can of compressed air usually did a much better job in half the time. Yet thousands of people bought one anyway because it looked clever. It was another classic example of companies taking an ordinary household item, shrinking it down to an absurd size, adding a USB cable, and convincing everyone they suddenly needed it. Today, these tiny vacuums still pop up online from time to time, mostly as novelty gifts rather than serious cleaning tools. 15. Dancing Santa figures. Every holiday season, stores filled their shelves with animated Santas that sang Christmas songs, danced awkwardly, and flapped their arms whenever someone pressed a button. The first time you saw one, it was genuinely funny. The second time, it was still entertaining. By the 50th performance of Jingle Bells, however, most families were probably searching for the off switch. Some versions played only one song. Others had several built into their tiny speakers. A few even moved their mouths in an attempt to lip-sync the lyrics. The technology wasn't particularly advanced, but that didn't stop millions from buying them as holiday decorations or gag gifts. Many ended up packed away in storage boxes after Christmas, only to emerge the following December for another season of repetitive singing. The strange thing is that people didn't really buy them because they needed another Christmas decoration. They bought them because they made guests laugh for about 30 seconds. After that, they mostly became background noise. Years later, many of these dancing Santas still work, which is almost ironic considering how quickly the novelty disappeared. They remain one of those products that seemed hilarious in the store, but spent most of their lives collecting dust in the attic until the holidays came around again. 14. Digital picture keychains. Before smartphones put thousands of photos in our pockets, companies tried a different idea. What if your keychain could display pictures? It sounded futuristic at the time. These tiny gadgets came with a miniature color screen that could hold anywhere from a handful of photos to maybe 100 if you were lucky. To add new pictures, you usually had to connect the device to a computer using a USB cable and install special software that rarely worked as smoothly as advertised. The screens were tiny, the battery life wasn't great, and the image quality was often disappointing. Yet people loved the concept. Suddenly, your keys could carry pictures of your family, your pets, or your last vacation. The problem was that you almost never looked at them. Most keychains spend their lives inside pockets, purses, or lying on a table. Pulling one out just to admire a tiny slideshow quickly became more trouble than it was worth. Then smartphones arrived. Within just a few years, everyone had a bright, high-resolution display in their pocket, capable of storing tens of thousands of photos. The digital picture keychain instantly became obsolete. What once seemed like the future suddenly looked like an outdated gadget from another era. 13. Fake Bluetooth earpieces. This might be one of the funniest trends of the late 2000s. Bluetooth headsets became incredibly popular because they made people look busy, important, and connected. Business executives wore them while walking through airports. Salespeople used them while driving. Celebrities were photographed wearing them in public. Before long, someone had an unusual idea. Why not sell fake Bluetooth headsets to people who didn't actually need one? Believe it or not, companies did exactly that. These fake earpieces looked almost identical to real Bluetooth devices, but contained absolutely no electronics. They didn't connect to a phone. They didn't play music. They didn't even light up. Their only purpose was to create the illusion that you owned expensive technology. In other words, people were paying money for something that pretended to be another product. Looking back, it sounds ridiculous, but enough people bought them to keep manufacturers in business for a while. It's a perfect example of how trends can sometimes become more important than functionality. People weren't buying usefulness, they were buying appearance. 12. Inflatable furniture. Every teenager in the early 2000s seemed to know someone who owned an inflatable chair. Bright colors, transparent plastic, and the promise of modern style made these pieces of furniture incredibly popular. On television and in magazines, they looked amazing. The reality was somewhat different. First, you had to inflate them, which wasn't always easy. Then came the constant problem of slow air leaks. No matter how carefully they were made, many inflatable chairs gradually lost pressure over time. A comfortable seat in the afternoon could become a sagging plastic puddle by the evening. During hot weather, they often became sticky, and every movement produced that unmistakable squeaking sound as plastic rubbed against plastic. They looked futuristic, but they rarely felt luxurious. Most owners eventually replaced them with ordinary furniture that didn't require occasional reinflation. Even so, inflatable furniture became one of the defining design trends of the early 2000s. Today, it survives mostly as a nostalgic reminder of a time when transparent plastic somehow seemed like the future of interior decorating. 11. Airzuka. If you've never seen an Airzuka before, imagine a toy that promises to let you shoot invisible balls of air across the room. That's exactly what it did. The device looked like a giant plastic cannon with an open barrel on one end and a stretchy membrane on the other. Pull the membrane back, let it snap forward, and it fired a concentrated ring of air strong enough to knock over a stack of cups or surprise someone standing several feet away. It was one of those products that looked incredible in commercials. Kids laughed, adults laughed, and everyone seemed amazed by the invisible air bullets. The problem was that the fun wore off surprisingly fast. After about 10 minutes, you'd tried every possible target in the house. You'd blown over paper cups, startled your brother, annoyed the family dog, and maybe knocked a few papers off the kitchen table. Then what? There wasn't much else to do with it. The Airzuka became one of those toys that was hilarious for an afternoon, but spent the next several years sitting in the back of a closet. It wasn't badly made. It actually worked exactly as advertised. The issue was that firing rings of air simply wasn't entertaining for very long. Still, it's remembered fondly because it was such a unique idea. Even today, people who owned one usually smile when they see it again, even if they admit they barely used it after the first week. 10. Laser keyboard. This gadget looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Instead of carrying a physical keyboard, you carried a tiny projector. Place it on a desk, and it would project the image of a full-sized keyboard onto the surface. Touch the glowing keys, and special sensors detected your finger movements, allowing you to type without an actual keyboard. When people first saw demonstrations online, many believed this would replace traditional keyboards forever. It certainly looked futuristic. The reality, however, was far less impressive. Typing on a completely flat table without physical keys felt strange. Since there was no tactile feedback, your fingers often drifted away from the correct positions, leading to frequent typing mistakes.
Bright sunlight made the projected keys difficult to see, and the sensors occasionally struggled to recognize fast typing. For quick emails, it was acceptable, but writing anything longer quickly became frustrating. Most people who tried one eventually returned to an ordinary keyboard because it was simply faster, more comfortable, and more reliable. The laser keyboard remains one of those inventions that looked years ahead of its time, but forgot one important detail. Sometimes, the old solution is already the best one. Just because something looks futuristic doesn't automatically make it better. 9. TV hat. Every now and then, a product comes along that makes you wonder whether anyone tested it before putting it on store shelves. The TV hat was one of those products. The idea was surprisingly simple. Instead of watching television on a regular screen, you wore a hat with a tiny display positioned directly in front of your eyes. It promised a private viewing experience wherever you went. Sounds impressive, right? Until you actually saw someone wearing one. The bulky headset looked awkward, the tiny screen wasn't particularly sharp, and wearing it for more than a short period quickly became uncomfortable. It also made interacting with the world around you almost impossible. Watching television while wearing a hat with a screen attached to your face wasn't exactly practical for everyday life. Products like this tried to predict the future of personal entertainment long before modern virtual reality headsets existed. The difference is that today's devices use advanced displays, motion tracking, and powerful processors. The TV hat simply gave you a tiny television attached to your forehead. While it deserves credit for being ahead of its time, it also serves as a reminder that not every futuristic idea is destined to succeed. Sometimes the future arrives, just not in the way companies expected. 8. Clip-on MP3 speakers. Before smartphones became the center of our digital lives, MP3 players ruled the world. Most people listened through headphones, but someone eventually decided that wasn't enough. The solution? Tiny clip-on speakers that attach directly to your MP3 player. In theory, they allowed you to share your music with everyone around you without needing a larger stereo. In practice, they sounded terrible. Because the speakers were so small, the audio was thin, weak, and almost completely lacked bass. At full volume, they distorted badly, and in any noisy environment, they were almost impossible to hear. They also drained the battery of your MP3 player much faster than headphones did. Yet they sold surprisingly well because the idea seemed convenient. Instead of carrying a portable speaker, you simply clipped one onto your player. The problem was that portable speakers improved incredibly fast over the following years, while smartphones gradually replaced dedicated MP3 players altogether. Suddenly, nobody needed tiny speakers designed for a device they no longer carried. Today, they're mostly remembered as one of those accessories that looked clever in the store, but offered very little real value. 7. Bedazzled phone charms. There was a time when owning a cell phone wasn't enough. It had to be decorated. The early 2000s gave birth to an entire industry built around tiny charms that dangled from flip phones and early smartphones. Some featured sparkling fake diamonds. Others looked like cartoon characters, miniature food, animals, hearts, stars, or anything else manufacturers could imagine. Many people attached several at once until their phone looked more like a Christmas tree than a communication device. At first, these charms were seen as a fun way to personalize your phone. But they came with one major downside. They got in the way. They tangled in pockets, scratched screens, caught on clothing, and constantly swung around while people talked on the phone. Some even snapped off after only a few weeks. As phone designs became sleeker and manufacturers focused on minimalist aesthetics,
these decorations slowly disappeared. Today, most people prefer a simple protective case, if anything at all. Looking back, bedazzled phone charms perfectly capture an era when technology wasn't just functional, it had to be flashy. The more glitter, the better. 6. USB beverage warmer. This invention promised to solve one of life's smallest inconveniences: cold coffee. The idea sounded brilliant. Plug a small heating plate into your computer's USB port, place your coffee mug on top, and enjoy a warm drink while you worked. Unfortunately, there was one small problem. A USB port simply doesn't provide much power. As a result, most beverage warmers didn't actually heat cold coffee. At best, they slowed down the process of it getting colder. If your drink was already lukewarm, the warmer usually couldn't bring it back to a satisfying temperature. Many users joked that it worked better as a coaster than as a heater. Others discovered that ceramic mugs were often too thick for the weak heating element to make much difference. Despite these limitations, thousands of people bought one because the concept made perfect sense on paper. It was another product that seemed incredibly practical until people actually started using it. Today, there are far better heated mugs with rechargeable batteries and temperature controls, making the old USB beverage warmer feel like an early experiment that never quite lived up to its promise. 5. Talking fish. Big Mouth Billy Bass. There are novelty products, and then there's Big Mouth Billy Bass. If you visited someone's house in the early 2000s, there was a surprisingly good chance you'd see a plastic fish mounted on a wooden plaque hanging on the wall. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary decoration, but the moment someone walked by or pressed a button, the fish suddenly came to life. It twisted its head, flapped its tail, and began singing songs like "Don't Worry, Be Happy" or "Take Me to the River." The first time people saw it, they usually laughed. It was unexpected, ridiculous, and surprisingly well animated for its time. But after hearing the same songs over and over again, the joke started wearing thin. Owners often admitted they spent more time turning it off than turning it on. Still, millions were sold around the world. It became one of the most recognizable novelty gifts of its generation, appearing in television shows, movies, and even office prank videos. Today, it's remembered less as a useful product and more as a symbol of an era when manufacturers believed almost anything could become a hit if it moved and made noise. 4. Zune accessories. Microsoft's Zune was supposed to challenge Apple's iPod. It was a solid music player with a clean design and some interesting features, but it never came close to matching the iPod's popularity. That didn't stop accessory companies from going all in. Stores quickly filled with Zune docks, speaker systems, protective cases, charging stations, armbands, decorative skins, and dozens of other add-ons. The problem was simple. Not enough people actually owned a Zune. While iPod accessories flew off the shelves, many Zune products sat untouched for months. Some retailers eventually marked them down by more than 70% just to clear inventory. It became a perfect example of what happens when manufacturers bet on the wrong product. Once smartphones replaced dedicated music players, nearly the entire accessory market disappeared overnight. Today, it's surprisingly difficult to find someone who still owns a working Zune, and the accessories have become even rarer. They serve as a reminder that creating an ecosystem of products only works if people actually buy the main device first. 3. Selfie toaster. Some inventions make you stop and ask one simple question: why? The selfie toaster is definitely one of them. Instead of producing ordinary toast, this appliance burned an image of your own face onto each slice of bread. All you had to do was upload a photograph, and the company created a custom heating plate designed specifically for your portrait. The next morning, your breakfast literally looked back at you. It was certainly unique, but that's about where the practical benefits ended. The novelty wore off almost immediately. Most people laughed the first time they saw it, took a few pictures for social media, and then went back to using a regular toaster. After all, toast disappears in a few bites, making it an odd place to display your face. The selfie toaster perfectly captured the internet culture of the 2010s, when products were increasingly designed to go viral rather than solve real problems. It wasn't built because people desperately needed personalized toast. It was built because someone knew the idea was so ridiculous that people would share it online. And judging by the millions of views it received, they were absolutely right. 2. Mini desktop basketball hoops. Almost every office supply store seemed to sell these at one point. The idea was simple. Attach a tiny basketball hoop to the side of your desk or even to your trash can, grab the miniature foam basketball, and spend your workday practicing impossible trick shots instead of, well, working. It sounded like harmless fun, and for the first hour, it usually was. Coworkers challenged each other, celebrated lucky shots, and laughed whenever someone accidentally launched the ball across the room. Some offices even started keeping score, turning coffee breaks into mini basketball tournaments. The commercials made it seem like the perfect way to make work more enjoyable. Instead of staring at spreadsheets all day, you could take a quick break and feel like an NBA superstar. It was one of those products that looked far more entertaining in advertisements than it did in real life. Eventually, reality set in. The hoop became just another object taking up space on the desk. The tiny basketball disappeared under a filing cabinet, rolled behind a bookshelf, or simply vanished forever. After a few weeks, nobody bothered looking for it anymore. Many offices quietly removed them because they created more distractions than entertainment. Meetings were interrupted by someone attempting a half-court shot across the room. Important phone calls occasionally ended with the sound of a foam basketball bouncing off a computer monitor. Looking back, desktop basketball hoops weren't actually bad products. They worked exactly as advertised. You really could shoot tiny basketballs all day if you wanted to. The problem was that people dramatically overestimated how long the novelty would last. Like many items on today's list, they were incredibly exciting to buy and surprisingly easy to forget. 1. Mood rings. It's hard to believe these colorful little rings convinced so many people they could reveal human emotions. The idea sounded almost magical. According to advertisements, the stone changed color depending on your mood. Blue supposedly meant you were calm. Green suggested you were relaxed. Black hinted that something was wrong. Every color came with its own personality, making it seem as though the ring understood exactly how you were feeling. Children loved comparing colors with their friends. Teenagers tried to figure out whether someone secretly liked them based on the color of a tiny piece of jewelry. Some people even believed the rings could detect stress before they felt it themselves. It all sounded surprisingly scientific. The reality was much less exciting. Mood rings weren't reading emotions at all. Inside the stone was a special liquid crystal that reacted to temperature. As your finger became warmer or cooler, the crystals changed shape, producing different colors. That temperature could change because of the weather, your body heat, holding a hot cup of coffee, washing your hands, or simply walking outside on a cold day. Your emotions had almost nothing to do with it. But that didn't stop millions of people from believing there was something mysterious about them. Even after scientists explained exactly how they worked, mood rings continued making comebacks every few years. During the early 2000s, retro fashion brought them back into stores, introducing an entirely new generation to a product that was just as inaccurate as it had been decades earlier. Perhaps that's what made them so successful. They weren't sold because they worked. They were sold because they started conversations. People enjoyed comparing colors, guessing each other's moods, and pretending the rings possessed some hidden power. Sometimes the illusion was more entertaining than the truth. And in many ways, that perfectly sums up today's entire list. Most of these products weren't complete failures because they were broken. They failed because they promised far more than they could ever deliver. Some looked futuristic, some were incredibly expensive. Others simply tried to solve problems that nobody actually had. Yet for a brief moment, millions of people believed they were worth buying. And that's a list of 20 of the strangest, most useless, and strangely popular products ever made. Some disappeared very soon after release, while others somehow became collector's items. And there are a few products that are still remembered today just because people can't believe they even existed. It's amazing how each generation had their own products, which seemed like a great idea back then, but have turned into jokes just a few years later. Who knows? Perhaps some of the gadgets that we buy today will be featured in a similar list in 20 years from now. What was the funniest product on our list today? Maybe you even had one of those? Write your comments down below. It was Saul. Peace out.